It's hard being a teenager. Coping with raging hormones, insecurities, and acne whilst trying to figure out just who you are and where you fit in society is no joke. It's not really the best time to try and make important choices about your future. So just imagine what being a teenager was like without the comfortable modern amenities that we have today. Let's face it, in medieval Europe you were lucky to have even reached your teens when childhood mortality was so high. The concept of adolescence was pretty much ignored in early medieval society. By the age of 12, in the eyes of the law, you were considered an adult. People died young and many children were left without one or even both parents before they hit puberty, some were orphaned before they were even born. Let's travel back in time now to see what it was like for the youth of the Middle Ages and why teenagers were given away to strangers and freshers had their teeth forcibly removed. Welcome to Medieval Madness. You're never too young. Towards the end of the medieval period, around the year 1500, the Venetian ambassador wrote about what he believed to be a strange type of parenting that he had experienced during his time in England. He said English families kept their children at home till the age of 7 or 9 at the utmost, and then put them out, both male and females, to hard service in the houses of other people, binding them generally for another 7 or 9 years. He observed that this happened irrespective of the family's status and wealth, noting, quote, "Everyone, however rich he may be, sends away his children into the houses of others, whilst he, in return, receives those of strangers into his own." The doubtful Italian was told that it was for the good of the child, although he believed that the English chose to do this because having other people's children in the house meant that they could work them hard and feed them less. This sort of cross-system of child raising was quite common across the north of Europe in the Middle Ages. Only a small minority of children went away to study at university or joined the clergy. Most were sent away to other homes to work as apprentices and servants. Usually they were older than the Venetian ambassador suggests, though being about 12 or 14. For peasants, the greatest motivation for waving off their children appears to have been financial. Having one less mouth to feed in a medieval household was always a bonus. But for some who genuinely believed that they were helping their child, and who had a little more money, they would save up and buy their offspring an apprenticeship. It seems that medieval teenagers were a source of cheap labour. After the Black Death struck in 1350, hiring a live-in apprentice made a lot of sense when, with a drop in population, hired workers became more expensive, but food became cheaper. Troubled teens. Perhaps there was a feeling that although parents could teach their children life skills, different and better things could be learned if they had training from someone else. Or maybe it was a way for parents to rid themselves of disobedient teenagers. There was a belief that it was easier for strangers to rear and educate children even in 14th century Italy. Paolo of Certaldo, a Florentine merchant, advised, quote, "If you have a son who does nothing good, deliver him at once into the hands of a merchant who will send him to another country, or send him yourself to one of your close friends. Nothing else can be done. While he remains with you, he will not mend his ways." Some teenagers were actually contractually forced to behave. In Northampton, England in 1396, the mayor witnessed a contract between a coppersmith named John Hindley and his apprentice Thomas. Hindley became a guardian to Thomas and promised to feed him, train him in his craft, and not punish him too harshly when he made mistakes. In return, Thomas had to promise not to run away, gamble, steal, visit prostitutes, or get married. If he broke the terms of the contract, then the length of the apprenticeship would double from 7 to 14 years. But for many young men, several years of celibacy was just too much, and apprentices earned a reputation for hanging around in taverns and reveling in shameless behaviour. For most teenagers, leaving their parents would probably be a traumatic event. One wrote, quote, "For all that was to me a pleasure when I was a child, from 3 years old to 10, while I was under my father and mother's keeping, be turned now to torments and pain." But he was one of the lucky ones that could write down his feelings and communicate with his parents at home. For most servants and apprentices who were illiterate, there was no way to keep in contact with their families. Even if they were only living a few miles away, they could feel abandoned and lonely. With puberty comes great responsibility. Although teenagers were considered to be immature, there are many examples of them being considered responsible enough to be made rulers. In 1483, Charles VIII of France became king at just 13. John of Bohemia was married and made king in 1410 at the age of 14. He was then made Count of Luxembourg at 17. The English military, which was well known for putting older, more experienced men in command, followed Edward the Black Prince at the Battle of Crécy in 1346, when he was only 16. Edward was regarded as one of the greatest knights of his age despite his youth, and won the accolade of being one of the most successful English commanders during the 100 Years' War and a paragon of chivalry from his contemporaries. Even some medieval girls were considered mature enough to be given positions of power. Joanna I became Queen of Naples in 1343. Joan of Arc led an army at the age of just 17, and many more boys and girls rose to power during the Middle Ages, including an emperor. Old before their time. Most elite women were inclined to marry younger than women from other social groups because of the need for political unions. Those in the highest levels of French and English society often married on or before the age of 12. At this point, they were considered to be an adult and were expected to behave as one. Of course, many elite boys also married at a young age, but expectations were different for them, and their carefree adolescence did not finish so suddenly. They were usually allowed to continue their tutoring and unruly behaviour after marriage. Henry Bracton, the 13th century jurist, wrote that a girl became a woman when she took on the responsibilities of a household. He was one of the few writers who bothered with the subject of a woman's life cycle at all. Women were considered to be in their prime during adolescence. It was a time when they were believed to be at their most physically beautiful and spiritually pure. Both a girl's virginity and youth were tied together. Once she was married and was no longer a virgin, then she was thought to have left behind the most perfect age of her life. It seems that for the medievals, the change from adolescent girl to adult woman came about because of their relationships with men, at the point when they left their family or apprenticeships and became wives. Misspent youth. The Manual Scholarium is a 15th century Latin text that was written in Germany. It is a how-to guide on being a student, a handbook on how to prepare for and better understand the term ahead. It's written in the form of a series of conversations, mainly between two students named Bartholdus and Camillus, who discuss aspects of their student lives at the University of Heidelberg. Among the many issues covered are enrollment, the minimum attendance required without getting into trouble, exams, university rules, how to get along with housemates, expenses for bread, books and the local craft beer, and women. One of the most interesting conversations between our two young scholars involves the initiation ceremony for new students called knocking off the horns. It was meant as a way of encouraging the latest recruits to learn humility and good behaviour by discarding their most uncultured and childish features. In the discussion, the baby-faced Venus, what we would call a fresher today, is cruelly insulted and humiliated by two older boys who accuse him of being a foolish, pathetic, foul-smelling, ugly animal. With Camillus asking, "What's the stink that's smelling up this place? There's either been a corpse rotting here or a goat, the filthiest of beasts." Bartholdus happily joins in the harassment, adding that the fresher has weak legs and resembles a little old woman bowed with age. The two tormentors decide that the new scholar must be purged and have his horns surgically removed, his teeth pulled out, his beard shaved off, and confess his horrible crimes before he can join their, quote, praiseworthy society of students. The fresher was made to wear a hood with horns and had boar's teeth inserted into his mouth, after which they would be knocked off or polished with oversized tools such as an axe and pliers. Many new students were injured because of this. At the end of the ritual, the fresher was forced to buy dinner and wine for the masters and older students as atonement for his sins. Teenage kicks. This type of initiation that we know today as hazing, or at the very least bullying, was not an isolated incident and happened all over Northern Europe. In Paris, where it was a particular problem, rules were brought in to stop physical and verbal abuse against freshers, in the chapter, in the dormitory, in the schoolroom, and in the gardens. Although the fact that the penalty for calling professors drunks at the Sorbonne University was to buy everyone a round of drinks, shows that the Parisian rulebook wasn't really followed that strictly. German students were banned from flinging feces and pouring urine on younger scholars. In Avignon, at the College of St. Nicholas, newcomers were made to serve dinner to the older scholars and put up with the embarrassment of being treated like a servant. And in various universities, a newcomer stumping up the cash to pay for a banquet for everyone else seemed to be quite normal. This was especially true for the freshers at Heidelberg, who had a new hazing ritual in 1419 that involved a student paying for his fellow college members to visit the local baths. As this was a euphemism for the collective hiring of a group of prostitutes, this can hardly be seen as a lesson in morality. And this was despite most establishments having rules against the excessive consumption of alcohol, taking part in gambling games, and engaging in sex workers. Costs were taken into consideration though, and in 1365 at Orleans, a rule was brought in to make sure that whatever financial forfeits were imposed on freshers, they were never made to spend so much money that they were forced to sell all of their books. University initiations were meant to have an important purpose in society by getting medieval youths ready for life in the real world. One historian suggests that the Manual Scholarium was written to help new students fit into the daily routines and customs of university life, and avoid the older wolves who were ready to pounce on them at the start of their education. And what better way was there to teach these lessons and shape teenagers into men than by learning about money, alcohol, being rude to professors, and gossiping about the evils of menstruating women. Thank you for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you next week for another video. Hope you have a great week. Cheers.